A single photon of ultraviolet light. One particle that left the surface of the sun 8 minutes and 20 seconds ago and crossed 93 million miles of empty space at $186,000 ms is about to be absorbed by a molecule sitting in the outer layer of your skin. That photon carries 4.4 electron volts of energy. It will break one chemical bond, and within the next 48 hours that broken bond will become a hormone that controls over 200 of your genes. Everything that follows, everything sunlight does to your blood pressure, your sleep, your mood, your bones, your immune system, begins with one photon breaking one bond. From the photon's perspective, the journey did not take 8 minutes. Special relativity says that at the speed of light, time does not pass for the traveler. The photon that is about to hit your skin experienced no duration between leaving the sun and arriving at your forearm, for its creation and absorption were the same event. But for your molecule, the 7-dehydrocholesterol sitting in your epidermis, synthesized by your own cells and placed there specifically to receive this photon. The arrival changes everything. A bond breaks. A shed changes. A cascade begins that will reach your liver, your kidneys, your bones, your immune cells, and over 200 of your genes before it is finished. Your grandmother knew all of this. She said it differently. Go outside, get some fresh air. You look pale. But she did not need to say it often because you were already out there. You spent your childhood in sunlight without thinking about it. You ran outside after breakfast and came back when the street lights came on. Every mechanism in this script was running at full capacity for the first decades of your life. And you never once thought about it because you never had to. The loss happened later. Work moved indoors. The commute moved into a car. Retirement moved to the living room. The knees made the garden harder. The people you used to walk with moved away or are gone. The advice your grandmother gave was not something you ignored as a child. It is something your life slowly made difficult to follow. And every year you spend more time indoors, the photon deficit deepens in your skin, in your retina, in your bones, in your blood pressure, in your sleep. Here's the photochemistry. Step outside tomorrow morning and hold your forearm in the sun. Within 10 seconds, ultraviolet B photons wavelengths between 290 and 315 nanometers penetrate the outer layers of your epidermis and reach a molecule called 7-dehydrocholesterol sitting in the membrane of your skin cells. 7-dehydrocholesterol is a cholesterol derivative. Your body synthesizes it specifically for this purpose. It sits in your skin and waits for a photon. When the UVB photon arrives, its energy is absorbed by the molecule's B ring, a hexagonal structure of carbon atoms held together by chemical bonds. The photon's 4.4 electron volts is enough to break one specific bond, the carbon 9 to carbon 10 bond. The ring opens. The molecule changes shape. It is no longer 7-dehydrocholesterol. It is now pre-vitamin D3. From here, your body temperature, 37 degrees C, slowly rearranges this broken molecule over the next day or two through a process called thermal isomerization. The pre-vitamin D3 converts to calciferol vitamin D3. Your liver adds one hydroxyl group, converting it to calcidiol. Your kidneys add another, converting it to calcitriol, the active hormone. Calcitriol enters your cells, passes through the cell membrane, crosses the nuclear envelope, and binds the vitamin D receptors sitting directly on your DNA. Those receptors are transcription factors. They control which genes are read and which stay silent. Calcitriol binding activates the transcription of over 200 genes affecting calcium absorption in your gut, phosphorus regulation in your kidneys, bone mineralization across your skeleton, immune cell function in your blood, and cell growth regulation in virtually every tissue. All of this from one photon breaking one bond in one molecule in your skin. Michael Hollick, the endocrinologist at Boston University, who has spent decades studying this pathway, estimated that 10 to 15 minutes of midday sun on your arms and face produces roughly 10,000 to 20,000 international units of vitamin D3. A typical supplement pill contains 400 to 1,000 units. Your skin, given 50 minutes of sunlight, manufactures 10 to 50 times what a supplement provides. Your skin is a pharmaceutical factory. Sunlight is the raw material and the factory has a built-in safety mechanism. Once enough pre-vitamin D3 accumulates, further UV exposure converts the excess into inert byproducts rather than more vitamin D. Your body cannot overdose on sun-produced vitamin D, it can overdose on supplements. The factory regulates itself. The pill bottle cannot. There is a latitude problem that makes this personal for anyone living north of roughly the 35th parallel, a line that runs through Memphis, Albuquerque and Seville. Above that latitude, from roughly November through February, the sun sits low enough in the sky that UVB photons must travel through so much additional atmosphere that nearly all of them are absorbed before reaching your skin. The 7-dehydrocholesterol sits in your epidermis through the entire winter, waiting for photons that never arrive. Your vitamin D levels dropped steadily from October through March, a decline documented in population studies across the Northern Hemisphere. By late winter, your stored vitamin D is at its annual minimum. Your immune surveillance is at its weakest. Your bone density loss is at its fastest. And the respiratory infection season peaks at exactly the time your photon supply runs out. This is not coincidence. It is photochemistry constrained by orbital mechanics. Hollick spent years advocating for moderate sun exposure and was removed from the dermatology department at Boston University for it. The dermatological establishment's position was absolute sun avoidance. Hollick's position, supported by the photochemistry and the population data, was that the dose matters, that moderate exposure produces essential hormones, and that the population most at risk for deficiency was the population most likely to stay indoors, people over 65. He lost professional standing for saying what the physics showed. The vitamin D deficiency epidemic among older adults, estimated at 40 to 60% of the population over 65 in northern latitudes, is the evidence his career predicted. Pigmentation adds another dimension to this that the physics makes unavoidable. Melanin, the pigment that determines skin color, absorbs UVB photons before they can reach the 7-dehydrocholesterol in the deeper layers of the epidermis. Darker skin contains more melanin and therefore requires longer sun exposure to produce the same amount of vitamin D. A person with very dark skin may need 3 to 5 times more sun exposure than a person with very light skin to synthesize the same quantity. This is not a flaw. It is an evolutionary calibration. Populations that evolved near the equator, where UVB is intense year-round, developed high melanin as protection against DNA damage. Populations that migrated to higher latitudes, where UVB is weaker, evolved lighter skin to allow the scarce photons through to the vitamin D factory. The physics match the geography. But when people with high melanin skin live at northern latitudes, which millions do, the mismatch creates a compounded deficit. Less UVB available from the sky and more melanin filtering what arrives. Vitamin D deficiency rates in dark-skinned populations at northern latitudes are significantly higher than in light-skinned populations at the same latitude. The photochemistry does not negotiate with social circumstance. It follows the physics of absorption. If you are over 65 and you spend most of your days indoors, and statistically you probably do, your pharmaceutical factory is running on a skeleton crew. The molecule is sitting in your skin waiting. The photon it needs is outside. Go outside. That was her prescription. That was the prescription. Now sunlight is doing something to your eyes that has nothing to do with seeing. And the second mechanism explains why you cannot sleep. Buried in your retina behind the rods and cones that give you vision are specialized cells that most people have never heard of. Intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells discovered by David Buren at Brown University in 2002. These cells contain a pigment called melanopsin tuned specifically to blue light at a wavelength of approximately 480 nanometers. They do not contribute to your visual experience. You do not see through them. They have a completely different job. These cells send signals along a dedicated neuropathway, the retino-hypothalamic tract, directly to a tiny cluster of roughly 20,000 neurons in your hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This cluster is your master circadian clock. It runs your entire 24-hour biological schedule. When cortisol rises in the morning to wake you, when body temperature peaks in the late afternoon to optimize physical performance, when digestion activates with daytime eating, when melatonin rises at night to initiate sleep. Every physiological rhythm in your body takes its timing from this cluster. And this cluster takes its timing from the light entering your eyes through melanopsin. Here is the number that makes this personal typical indoor lighting. The light in your living room, your kitchen, your doctor's waiting room produces roughly 100 to 500 lux. The melanopsin cells in your retina need approximately 1,000 to 2,000 lux to fire at the intensity required for robust circadian entrainment. Outdoor shade, not direct sunlight, just standing under a tree on a cloudy day, produces 10,000 to 25,000 lux. Direct sunlight produces 50,000 to 100,000. The difference between indoors and outdoors is not a percentage. It is an order of magnitude. If you spend your day inside, your circadian clock is receiving 1/10 to 150th of the signal it needs. Sitting by a bright window helps, but glass filters much of the UV spectrum, and the light intensity, even near a window, is a fraction of outdoor levels. The melanopsin cells evolved to be calibrated by the sun. Indoor lighting is not a dim version of sunlight. It is a different category of stimulus, too weak to do what the clock requires. Without the daily morning light signal, your circadian clock drifts. It runs at approximately 24.2 hours instead of 24. a measured property of the human clock established through isolation experiments where subjects lived without time cues. 2 to 10 of an hour may sound trivial. Over a week, it shifts your entire sleep-wake cycle by nearly an hour and a half. Over a month, you are sleeping and waking at completely different times than your environment demands. The morning light signal resets the clock to exactly 24 hours every day, synchronizing your internal rhythm to the actual rotation of the Earth. If you are over 65 and your sleep has deteriorated, if you wake at 3 in the morning and cannot return to sleep, if you feel drowsy by 7 in the evening, if you never feel fully alert during the day, the most likely physics problem is that your circadian clock is not receiving a strong enough morning light signal to maintain its amplitude. Circadian amplitude decreases with age. The peaks flatten. The cortisol morning surge becomes shallower. The melatonin evening rise becomes weaker. The system loses definition the way a radio signal loses clarity as you drive away from the transmitter. Morning sunlight, even 15 minutes outside within the first hour of waking, restores the signal's strength. The melanopsin cells fire. The supercharismatic nucleus resets. The downstream hormonal cascade recalibrates. Cortisol rises at the right time. Melatonin rises at the right time. Body temperature cycles with the correct amplitude. No supplement does this. No sleeping pill adjusts your circadian clock. No drug enters your retina and resets the superchiasmatic nucleus. Photons entering your eyes through melanopsin dough. That is the only input the clock accepts. There is an additional factor that makes this harder as you age. The lens of your eye yellows over decades, a gradual accumulation of chromophores that absorb short wavelength light. By 65, your lens transmits significantly less blue light than it did at 20. The specific wavelength melanopsin needs 480 nanometers deep blue is precisely the range your aging lens filters most aggressively. The clock signal is weakened at both ends. Less time outdoors means fewer photons arriving, and the yellowing lens means fewer of the arriving photons reach the melanopsin cells. The result is a circadian system receiving a fraction of the signal it received at 30. The sleep problems that accompany aging are not inevitable. They are in part a photon deficit, addressable by spending more time in bright outdoor light to compensate for the reduced transmission. Sati Ankoli Israel at the University of California, San Diego documented this in clinical studies. Increased bright light exposure in older adults, improved sleep efficiency, reduced nighttime awakenings, and consolidated the sleep-wake rhythm. The intervention was not a drug. It was light. Go to bed at the same time and get up with the sun. That is what she always said. She was describing circadian intraman. She just called it common sense. Those same melanopsin cells connect to another structure in your brainstem, the Raft nuclei, where serotonin is manufactured. Gregory Lambert and his colleagues, publishing in The Lancet in 2002, did something remarkable to measure this relationship. They sampled the jugular vein, the vein that drains the brain, and directly measured serotonin turnover in living human subjects in relation to the amount of bright light they had been exposed to that day. More bright light meant more serotonin synthesis. The relationship was direct, continuous, and independent of season, temperature, or mood. More photons entering the retina meant more serotonin produced in the brain. The pathway runs through the same melanopsin cells, the same retinohypothalamic tract branching to the rough nuclei instead of, or in addition to, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Serotonin is not just a mood molecule, though it is the primary target of the most widely prescribed class of antidepressants, the SSRI, which work by keeping serotonin available in the synaptic cleft for longer. Sunlight increases the supply. The drugs slow the removal. Both raise effective serotonin levels through completely different mechanisms. Lambert's data showed that the difference in serotonin turnover between a bright sunny day and an overcast indoor day was substantial. Not a subtle shift, but a measurable change in the brain's primary mood, regulating neurotransmitter, driven entirely by the number of photons reaching the retina. Serotonin is also the biochemical precursor to melatonin. Your pineal gland converts serotonin into melatonin after dark, the hormone that initiates and maintains sleep. Higher daytime serotonin production means more raw material available for nighttime melatonin synthesis. The light-mood-sleep axis is a single continuous biochemical pipeline. Sunlight enters the retina, stimulates serotonin production during the day, and the accumulated serotonin converts to melatonin at night. Low daytime light exposure means low serotonin, which means low melatonin, which means poor sleep, which means low energy the next day, which means less time outside, which means less light exposure. The cycle feeds itself downward. Morning sunlight breaks the cycle at the top. Seasonal affective disorder, the clinical depression that tracks with winter months at northern latitudes, Is this pipeline running on insufficient input? The reduced daylight hours of winter mean fewer photons reaching the melanopsin cells, which means less serotonin synthesis in the ref nuclei, which means both lower mood during the day and less melatonin precursor available for sleep at night. Light therapy boxes which deliver 10,000 lux of broad spectrum light at eye level for 30 minutes each morning. Treat seasonal affective disorder by restoring the photon input that winter removes. The treatment is not psychological, it is photochemical. The photons enter the retina, the melanopsin cells fire. The raphe nuclei produce more serotonin and the mood lifts. The mechanism is the same as stepping outside on a bright day. The light box substitutes for the sun when the sun is not available. If you have noticed that your mood is lower in winter, that you feel more anxious on days when you stay indoors, that something lifts when you step outside into bright light, that is serotonin synthesis responding to photon input through your retina. The feeling is the chemistry is the physics. And the physics operates whether or not you believe sunlight affects your mood. Your grandmother said fresh air will do you good. She was partly right. The air was incidental. The photons were the intervention. Now there is a third mechanism, and it operates through your skin rather than your eyes. And it explains something about blood pressure that most physicians have never been taught. Richard Willer, a dermatologist at the University of Edinburgh, discovered that sunlight lowers blood pressure through a pathway completely independent of vitamin D. Your skin stores nitric oxide, a gas molecule that relaxes arterial walls. In chemical reservoirs, nitrite and S-nitrothiol compounds distributed throughout your epidermis and dermis. These reservoirs are loaded. They are waiting for a signal. The signal is ultraviolet, a radiation longer wavelength than the UVB that makes vitamin D, carrying less energy per photon, but penetrating deeper into the skin. When UVA hits these nitric oxide reservoirs, the energy breaks the chemical bonds holding the nitric oxide in storage. The gas releases directly into your bloodstream. It diffuses into the smooth muscle cells surrounding your arteries and activates an enzyme called guanylate cycles, which produces cyclic GMP, which relaxes the muscle fibers. Your arteries dilate. Blood pressure drops. Weller measured this carefully. He used UV lamps at constant temperature to prove the effect was photochemical, not thermal. He blocked UVB to prove it was independent of vitamin D. The blood pressure reduction was real, reproducible, and operated through a mechanism that no oral medication targets, direct photochemical release of a stored vasodilator from the skin. Weller's broader argument challenged dermatological orthodoxy the same way Hollick's had a decade earlier, but from a different angle and with different data. Weller was a dermatologist arguing against blanket sun avoidance. He was contradicting the public health message of his own specialty. His argument was epidemiological cardiovascular disease kills roughly 80 times more people per year than skin cancer. If moderate sun exposure reduces cardiovascular mortality through nitric oxide release, even modestly the lives saved from heart attacks and strokes vastly outnumber the lives lost to melanoma. The all-cause mortality calculation, when you include the cardiovascular benefits, does not favour staying indoors. Weller presented this data at dermatology conferences to audiences whose careers were built on sun avoidance messaging. The reception was not warm, but the nitric oxide data was reproducible. The cardiovascular mortality numbers were from national registries and the physics was not debatable. Two researchers from the same field, Hollick from endocrinology, Weller from dermatology, arrived at the same conclusion through completely different mechanisms. Moderate sunlight is not optional for human health. The body was built to receive it. If you're over 65 and managing hypertension, and the majority of people in your age group are, morning sunlight on your skin is a direct photochemical intervention in blood pressure regulation. The nitric oxide reservoirs in your skin reload overnight from dietary nitrate and nitrite. The morning sun releases them. The arterial dilation lasts for hours. Your doctor may never mention this. The physics is published in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology. You need some color in those cheeks. That is what she always said. She was describing nitric oxide-mediated vasodilation of dermal blood vessels. The color was blood flow. The mechanism was photochemistry. Here is where honesty requires a pause. The same ultraviolet radiation that synthesizes vitamin D in your skin and releases nitric oxide from your dermal reservoirs also damages DNA. Specifically, UVB photons, the same wavelength that breaks the 7-dehydrocholesterol bond, can also create thymine dimers in your DNA. Two adjacent thymine bases bonding covalently where they should not. Your cells have repair systems that detect and excise these lesions. nucleotide excision repair enzymes that cut out the damaged segment and rebuild it from the complementary strand. The system is efficient. It handles thousands of lesions per day in every skin cell, but it is not perfect. Accumulated unrepaired damage over decades increases the risk of mutations, and some of those mutations can lead to skin cancer. Repair capacity is not infinite, and it declines with age. The nucleotide excision repair enzymes work more slowly at 65 than they did at 30. The threshold at which damage outpaces repair is lower. This is the physics of the trade-off. The same photon that activates a life-sustaining hormonal cascade can also damage the genome it passes through on the way in. Both effects are real. Both are dose-dependent, and the dose at which the benefits plateau while the damage continues accumulating is remarkably well defined. Dermatological consensus and the photochemistry converge on the same number. 10 to 20 minutes of unprotected midday sun exposure on arms, face, and if possible legs is sufficient for near maximal vitamin D synthesis, significant nitric oxide release, robust circadian entrainment through the eyes, and meaningful serotonin stimulation while staying within the skin's daily repair capacity. Beyond that window, sunscreen makes sense. Within that window, the factory runs at full capacity and the repair crews keep up with the damage. The physics is simultaneous. Sunlight builds essential hormones, lowers blood pressure, regulates mood, sets your circadian clock, and damages DNA all at the same time. The dose determines which of these effects matters most. 15 minutes of morning sun runs the factory at full capacity while keeping the damage within warranty. There is one more thing sunlight does that connects every mechanism in this script, and it happens in your bones. Calcitriol, the active vitamin D hormone your kidneys produce from the molecule that Photon broke in your skin, controls calcium absorption in your gut. Without adequate calcitriol, your intestines absorb only 10 to 15% of dietary calcium. With adequate calcitriol, absorption rises to 30 to 40%. The difference is not subtle. It determines whether your bones receive enough calcium to maintain their density or whether your body, desperate for calcium to run your nerves and muscles, begins withdrawing it from the one calcium reservoir it always has available, your skeleton. Osteoporosis, the progressive loss of bone density that affects roughly 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men over 65, is partly a disease of insufficient sunlight. The photon that broke the bond in your skin set in motion a hormonal cascade that ends at your bones. Without the photon, the cascade does not run. Without the cascade, calcium absorption drops. Without calcium absorption, bone density declines. The connection between staying indoors and breaking a hip is not metaphorical. It is photochemical. The consequences are not abstract. Hip fractures in people over 65 carry a mortality rate of roughly 20 to 30% within the first year, not from the fracture itself, but from the cascade of immobility, infection, blood clots, and deconditioning that follows. A hip fracture at 75 is one of the most dangerous events in aging medicine. And the chain of causation that leads to it runs in part through a photon that never arrived. A molecule in the skin that never changed shape, a hormone that never reached the gut, calcium that never reached the bone. But calcitriol does something else that connects sunlight to falls, not just fractures. Vitamin D receptors are present in skeletal muscle tissue, and calcitriol binding activates genes involved in muscle protein synthesis and neuromuscular coordination. Vitamin D deficiency is associated with muscle weakness, impaired balance, and increased postural sway, the subtle instability that precedes a fall. Multiple randomized control trials have shown that vitamin D supplementation in deficient older adults reduces fall risk by roughly 20%. The sunlight that strengthens bones also strengthens the muscles and reflexes that prevent the fall that would break them. The photon protects at both ends, the bone that might shatter and the muscle that might prevent the impact. Calcitriol also modulates your immune system, activating antimicrobial peptides called catholicans that your macrophages use to kill bacteria and viruses. Calcitriol binding is directly proportional to vitamin D levels. Low vitamin D means low Catholic means reduced pathogen killing capacity. Before antibiotics, tuberculosis sanatoriums placed patients on sun-facing balconies. Niels Finneisen won the Nobel Prize in 1903 for treating skin tuberculosis with concentrated light decades before anyone understood the catholicidin mechanism underneath. The winter spike in respiratory infections correlates precisely with the seasonal nadir of vitamin D levels. The months when UVB intensity drops below the threshold needed to drive the reaction in your skin. Your immune system runs on a hormone that depends on sunlight. In winter, the supply drops. The infections rise. Your grandmother said you will catch your death staying inside all winter. The physics was on her side. Step back and look at what a single morning of sunlight does to the body you are living in right now. A photon breaks a bond in your skin and initiates a cascade that ends with a hormone controlling 200 of your genes, building bones, activating immune cells, strengthening muscles. Melanopsin cells in your retina detect the light and reset your circadian clock to the rotation of the Earth, correcting the drift that has been degrading your sleep. UVA photons release stored nitric oxide from your skin, dilating your arteries and lowering blood pressure for hours. All activated by stepping outside for 15 minutes in the morning. All deactivated by staying indoors. Every piece of advice your grandmother ever gave you about going outside. Go out and play. Get some sun. Fresh air will do you good. You look pale. You will catch cold staying inside. Every single one maps to a specific photochemical or photoneural mechanism that modern science has measured, published and reproduced in peer-reviewed journals across 3 decades of research. She did not know about melanopsin or the supraismatic nucleus or S-nitrosol reservoirs or the carbon 9 to carbon 10 bond in 7-dehydrocholesterol. She did not need to. She knew that people who went outside felt better, slept better, got sick less and lived longer. She was right. She was always right. The physics just took a few decades to catch up with what she could see with her own eyes. Tomorrow morning, step outside. Hold your face to the sun for 15 minutes. The photon that left the sun 8 minutes ago is arriving now. It will break one bond in one molecule in your skin and your body. The body your grandmother worried about. The body she sent outside every chance she got. The body that has been waiting indoors for the raw material it was built to receive will do the